at NTV. Morning at NTV
is brought to you by
Chakaza.
Welcome to our Kickstarter this Thursday morning. Now, of course, we've heard from different sides regarding the FDC wars, but we've not heard from one who was regarded a mole back in the day, only for him to state that time will prove him the right person over the mole situation in the FDC. We're talking about Major General Mugisha Muntu, who then came out of the FDC to form his own party, which is known as ANT. We did have Ali Mivule meeting up with him this morning to have a dialogue on the FDC wars and what his opinions are on the matter.
Yes, General, a lot is happening right now in the political space of the country, and all is not well in your former political party, the FDC. What do you make of the current situation there?
Well, we are in a state of uncertainty overall. When autocratic regimes go through a process of entrenching themselves over a long period of time, all that we see happening is an outcome of that. Because one thing that causes autocratic regimes to hang onto power for a long time, they have to create an environment where fear rules. They have to use deception and divisive tactics to splinter the population, to ensure that there is instability within the communities. Basically, the biggest fear of autocratic regimes is have any organized center outside of their own control over power. And it has its own negative effect on the character of people, on the character of society. Because when people lose self-confidence, when people start looking at how to survive, and therefore even bow to those whom they know are doing wrong, when people participate in things that they don't believe in, it eats them up internally, undermines their character, undermines their inner strength, and therefore eventually find that there is a society which is simply almost rootless. It's like you see the water lilies on the water, the water bodies. When wind comes, it sweeps them in whichever direction it wants to go. Because when people lack confidence, you gradually don't get people who are able to stand firm and say, this is right, this is wrong. That's where we're at right now.
At the moment, we're having two power centers in the FDC. We have Katonga as well as the Najjanankumbi, that's the party headquarters. Do you think this is the center of controversy? And what's the role of the former party president, Dr. Kizza Besigye, in all this?
Again, that's also a byproduct of having a totalitarian regime. Because a regime which just wants to hang on to power at any cost never creates the environment in which people participate in politics, people who are in leadership, even outside of the regime, like those who are in the opposition, to operate in an environment where there is training in leadership skills, where there is an environment where they build trust, where there is an environment where they train in management of internal contradictions. Because there is no society where you won't find internal contradictions. There is no organization where you won't find internal contradictions. However, if there is no culture which is already established that enables leaders to adopt that culture of how to manage internal contradictions, and if that culture does not exist already, and then there is a regime which even exacerbates the problem further by creating fear, one, and also infiltrating organizations, not only political, economic, as well as social. Because you see, their major focus is creating stability everywhere, so there's only one stable area. In most times, it is either an individual or the system which is autocratic. Here it is just around an individual. General Museveni wants to be the only stable factor. For everything else to be unstable, and therefore for a country to be pushed into a position where they say, what alternative do we have? This is the only guy who can maintain stability in a country. And therefore what is in FDC is not new, nor would it be strange. The challenge, I think, is the lack, maybe, of capacity. If they have the capacity, they'll be able to manage the internal contradictions and stabilize the situation. Even in our time, Katonga existed. They were there in Najanankumbi. There were live contradictions. But until 2017, people didn't know that there were those contradictions. So we used the skills to ensure that they maintained stability and hope that at some point elections or maybe change of one nature or another on the different sides that would resolve that problem. It didn't. I know I've had a question, which is a legitimate question. I had a senior leader asking that, suppose I had won. Because you know, when we paid, we exit. That suppose I had won. What would I have done? Would have continued managing the party in spite of the contradictions that there were, and hoping that at some point we'd be able to resolve those contradictions. So when we lost, and the key campaign message was, we must have one strategy. One party, one strategy. And the delegates determined so. I didn't quarrel about the outcomes. I congratulated Honorable Boy. And in a sense, to be honest with you, people may not understand this, I think it was a godsend. Because we separated peacefully. That we ceased to fight from within. That we got time to start organizing around what we believe in, because that's what we are doing. We are at peace, and we had hoped that FDC would also be at peace. You know, and we don't, you know, we have had no contradictions with FDC after the first 1 year, because in the first 6 months, 1 year, we were under intense attack by colleagues who thought that what we had done was meant to destroy them. And of course, that was wrong. Why? Because if we had wanted to really weaken FDC, one, we would have rigged that election. There's no way we could have lost an election which was under our management. We had the majority in NEC. Incidentally, the chairman of the Electoral Commission, under whom I lost twice, in 2015 and 2017. Most people don't know. He is the chairman of the Electoral Commission of Alliance for National Transformation, as we speak. Had we wanted to rig those two elections, when I ran with Dr. Chizabezi in 2015, I would never have lost to him. We would have manipulated it, they would have quarreled, we would have kept quiet and quarreled like happens elsewhere. 2017, we could have done the same thing. We would have manipulated the electoral process, and I would have become the party president, and I would have managed that situation thereafter. Of course, if we were more, as people were saying, there's no way the regime would have allowed, after we would cheat an election, for us to be ousted. That would not have been possible. So why on earth would we exit in a peaceful, managed way, first conceding defeat, but also losing when I had been the one in control? Some people think that that's naivety, that how could you lose an election under which you are a president? I subscribe to values. I walk the talk. If I say one thing, that's what I follow through. So I can't even understand some of the people in the opposition who seem not to understand that.
I understand this is not the first time that we're hearing of conflict in the FDC, but during your time as the party president, how did you handle such?
All the 5 years that I was in leadership, we managed internal contradictions right from the time of elections. Because when 2012, when I was elected the party president, one faction actually wanted to start a party. So they launched and went all over the country quietly. It was never open. And there's a group, it was, I think, called the Group of 360, those who had voted for Honorable Nathan Nandala. We reached out, we sent emissaries to go and meet the key actors. We wanted the two sides to put their committee that would go and discuss and see how to resolve the contradiction. Eventually, it fizzled out. The party didn't take off. Although the people apparently who had been approached to start the party, for whatever reason, I think decided not to go in that direction. But the internal contradiction remained, and it was intense. However, because of the manner in which we managed it, the population never knew what was happening internally. So we contained it from within, because we would have open discussions internally within the institutions of the party. Until 2017, actually that's when most people knew that there had been an internal contradiction that we had been trying to manage. However, it had a toll on us as a party, because we believed in two different routes on how to take power. There are those who believed in defiance. There are those of us who believe that we needed to build grassroots structures, build our capabilities so that we can generate strength from down, and that strength is the one that would enable us to take levels of leadership from Council 3, Council 5, mayors, LC 3 chairpersons, LC 5 chairpersons, MPs, and then also take the presidency. We never fully agreed on that. We attempted to make both work. It never helped. So 2017, we resolved that.
Do you think the FDC has learned anything from the mistakes that forced you and your colleagues out of the party?
I really hope that they've learned lessons, not only through our own experience, but also through the experience of 60 years. We don't have any party which has never gone through a crisis in the last 60 years. None. The movement itself has its own internal crisis, there's no doubt about that, but because of incumbency, they are able to cover up, they're able to bribe with jobs, with the money, and compromise people. But even their own contradictions keep growing. And they're also going to reach a point where they're going to, possibly, if they don't manage them, and I doubt where they will manage them, so they will implode at some point. I have no doubt about that. I've seen that direction. It's been a very slow process, but it keeps building, and they reach the crisis point. I have no doubt about that. So the colleagues in FDC, to me, I'll keep watching and see how they manage themselves in the next 3 months. Because in November is not far. Patience is something we need to exercise. All of us who are in politics, patience is highly required. So let's keep watching and see what happens. If they're able to resolve the internal contradiction through negotiations internally and resolve it, then they'll create stability and then they can move forward. If they fail to do that, then they would have to organize an election. If the election is respected by all sides, then it can resolve the problem. Because in our case, I remember clearly in our campaigns, Honorable Patrick Amuriat told the delegates, and I agreed with them to that extent, that we cannot have the party pursue two strategies. It's causing paralysis, it's causing endless internal fights. So the delegates must choose which direction should the party take. So we went out there, sold our strategies, and Honorable Amuriat won. I lost. I considered losing, but I told them that now that the party has determined to go in one route, we must go around and find out what we are going to do next. That's what led us to separation. But we didn't rupture. People need to know that we didn't rupture. It was an organized exit because we wanted FDC to survive. The manner in which we conducted the elections, to the extent that at the end of our process, we wrote a report, and I called Honorable Amuriat. We organized the meeting, and we met. And we presented a report and told them the options we had. The option one was to remain inside and try to fight to change the direction of the party. That would have continued the internal fights. The other option would have been to keep quiet and just simply follow a strategy that we didn't necessarily think should be the primary strategy to follow. So we said those two options couldn't work. So we decided we will exit, we'll leave you space so that you can build around defiance. Since all of you believe in that, then that should give you elbow room to do all things necessary to build that capability. And we told them, if you're able to take power before any other process, invite us. We can come and discuss on how to manage power. And then we exit, and since that time, we also promised them that we would not provoke them, would not attack them, would not undermine them. And I know for sure, since that time, 3, maybe and a half years ago, we've never done that. We never provoke FDC, we never attack them, we never undermine them. So we kept our word. And that's what we are trying to build on, a foundation of a value-driven organization. So in regard to their current contradictions, that can also resolve, because they could sit and say, you know what, if we cannot discuss and agree on this, let's have a fair election in which all sides would agree on. And whichever side wins takes the helm of power and takes the party in the direction they want to take it. If they manage that way, then the group which loses would have now to ask themselves what to do next. They could decide to exit. If they decide to exit, my hope is that they would exit in a manner that would not be rupturous, but would be an organized exit. So that's fully dependent on all sides, how they manage that. Short of that, if they don't organize an internal fair process, they just end up fighting. And at the end of it all, the party will just really be so weakened that its future would start becoming doubtful. So my hope is that all of them are looking at that.
General, do you think the NRM is sponsoring the fights within the opposition?
It is one of their tools of weakening the opposition. Oh, they do that since 2004. So there's nothing new in regard to that. So the survival of an organization cannot depend on the goodwill of the regime. It has none. It must be dependent on the skills of the leaders who are able to neutralize that infiltration.
What strategy should the opposition political parties adopt for their financing? And what's the role of their supporters here?
I think the population is the one that really needs to understand this situation for two reasons. The population needs to invest in their future. So, ensuring that they are strong, stable, well-organized parties is part of having a stable infrastructure for governance in a country. Two, the population needs to know that they need to immunize these parties, because the danger is not only domestic, it's also international. If you don't invest in parties, most of those who have got leaders who are really driven by a desire to develop a country, if they don't get money, some parties can become desperate. Their money is all over the world, which can be accessed, as long as you are able to subscribe to what they want you to do in the event that you get into power. So you can imagine if the population doesn't see the vulnerability of parties. If parties become vulnerable, in the event that they take power, the country will become vulnerable. So people who are educated should understand that. I keep saying this all the time. They give money to parties, people who are going to get married. They give money to people who are going to be buried. They give money to churches, to mosques. When it comes to politics, which is at the core of our existence, they seem not to be concerned. Everything works or fails to work because of politics. I thought that would be our central consideration in all that we do in our lives, as we are still on this side of life, until we choose to go to hell or heaven, whichever we would have subscribed to. As long as we are still this side of life, politics is at the core of our existence. Anything that goes right is because there's good politics. Anything goes wrong is because there's poor politics. So when turn around the futures of a country, invest in political parties. Parties which have members of parliament get funds from the Electoral Commission. It's part of the constitutional provisions. And the more members of parliament you have, the more money you get. So NUP gets the largest amount. FDC gets the second largest amount because they've got about 31 or 32 MPs. And the only other two parties which are there, but their presence is small. DPOK has about 15, I think, 12 or 15. PPP has one member, JEMA has one member, UPC has about 6 or 9. So those get resources, and it depends on what they want to do. At least those which are like DP, UPC, and FDC and NUP. So the funds are not adequate, but they can enable them to do the things that would be necessary to attract more funding for the party. Because any party which builds credibility in the eyes of the public, and a party which positions itself to be seen to be a credible political alternative, And more so when people recognize that it can actually not only hold the country, but can manage it. If you keep doing a number of things, you can attract funds. And then you continue doing whatever you want to do to access power. Now we are in a more challenging situation because we don't have a member of parliament yet. Our members who could have made it to parliament were basically, deliberately cheated. We know the regime had, they gave specific instructions. Someone like Honorable Mwiru would have come to parliament, someone like Jerry Karhang would have come to parliament, Honorable Alas would have come to parliament, Cassiano Wadri, they were clearly cheated. You had the lady Gloria in Madiokoro, she was cancelled, her candidature, because they said that the one who nominated her and the one who, the seconder, that she had bribed, that she had forged their signatures. They sign in front of a returning officer. How could that happen? She would have taken that seat, but they cancelled her candidature. They cancelled they also denominated Martin in Terego, and also Borowa was cheated in Terego. So we would have had about 10. The regime knew what it means when money gets into our hands. So we never made it to parliament. We are not bothered by that. So we keep trying to do things, you know, in public, to try to raise resources from people who understand who we are, our capabilities, and what we can do when we get resources, people who understand our discipline and focus, and we'll keep at that until we're able to make a breakthrough.
You lost one of your senior members of the ANT, Honorable Paul Mwiru. Has this affected you in any way, and what do you make of it?
I don't see any problem with that because he's moved from an opposition party to another opposition party. So I don't see any problem in regard to that. Because if a person feels that maybe where they are at is no longer consistent with their projection of where they would want to be in the future or where they would want to see things happen in the future, then you move to another location where I think things will work out better. So I have no problem with that at all. Yeah. The problem I have is when you are in the opposition and you've already expressed yourself that you want to see regime change, you want to see a better political, economic environment in the country, and then along the way you back up, and then you join a regime. That's a little bit problematic.
Do we see a joint opposition come 2026?
We have to focus on ensuring that we are stable and that we are strong. Because any eventual coalition that would form, its stability would be dependent on its component parts. Its strength would depend on the strength of the component parts. You cannot combine when you are unstable. It's like a table. It has 4 legs. If any of the 4 legs is unstable, that table is not going to be stable. So you must ensure that the 4 legs are stable. Or 3. There are 3-legged tables. Whichever number of legs, they all must be stable. If they are unstable, the overall situation will be unstable in the event of parties coming together. We keep communicating this to colleagues over and over. And therefore, that's where the concentration must be. That's what we keep doing in Alliance for National Transformation, to build our capabilities, to build our strength, and to ensure that we are stable. That anybody who tries to infiltrate us, that we neutralize them, because we have the skills, by God's grace. I heard General Museveni say, about 5 years ago, saying that there will be no opposition in 2021, which was a wrong statement. Maybe if he had qualified and said there won't be any opposition party, maybe there you could agree. But opposition means the people who want to see change in the country. Basically, they are the ones whom we look at as opposition. So the people may get confused and people need to get clarity on this. They may see instability and weakness on our side as political organizations which would represent their interests for those who want to change. Even if they see weakness there, it doesn't mean that the opposition is weak. No, the opposition actually has grown. There are more people now who want to see the regime change than those who were there in 2001, 2006, 2011, 2016, and 2021. They keep growing because the situation is getting more and more desperate. So what does that mean? That those of us who are organizing to represent the interests of people who want to see change must really, put up our socks and do better than we are doing and tap into that ripe situation where people want to see change, so that we can build the trust that is necessary, so we can build the image that we are capable, that we can not only take power, but we can also manage a country. Because the moment any of the parties in the opposition is able to do that, create that perception, I can tell you it is going to be overwhelmed by the numbers of people that will give it support.